black, white, and beloved by many. In the 1930s, American socialite Ruth Harkness traveled for months to reach the heart of China's Tibetan Plateau. Her mission was to bring back what was then considered one of the most mysterious animals on the planet, a live giant panda cub. Several treacherous expeditions made Harkness an American hero, and the first two cubs ever brought back to the US became instant celebrities. It was the beginning of a global love affair with the giant panda. China soon started using pandas to boost its presence on the world stage by making politics out of conservation in a program better known as panda diplomacy.
Panda diplomacy is the use of pandas, the loan of pandas, by the Chinese government in Beijing to foreign countries to show its favor, to show that they are trying to develop good ties with this country, or that they have good ties with the country. And so it's really a symbolic gesture that is a way of cementing the relationship between China and another country in the world.
Wild giant pandas are found only in southwestern China along the Tibetan Plateau. Beijing considers the animals to be national treasures and used to give them to other countries as a sign of friendship. Between 1957 and 1983, China gave away 24 pandas to 9 different nations. Because they were so rare, zoos in those countries often exchanged pandas for research or to mate. Some diplomacy experts said the pandas helped bridge ideological divides.
The modern era of panda diplomacy, speaking as someone from the United States, really began with Richard Nixon's visit to China in 1972. And at that visit, the story goes that Patricia Nixon, Mr. Nixon's wife, was sitting next to Zhou Enlai at a dinner, and she saw a container of Panda cigarettes in front of him, and she said how cute the pandas were, and he said, "Oh, I can give you some pandas." And that's allegedly the story of how pandas came to the National Zoo in the United States. And that really set off just an incredible surge of, as all the headlines said, pandemonium. I think that first exchange in the 70s was when panda diplomacy was really at its most promising, because it showed that the two countries were, even though they were on opposite sides of the Cold War, that they were really committed to creating a new and different relationship as they moved forward.
But when Deng Xiaoping ruled China starting in the late 1970s, a different use for the panda population emerged. From the mid-1980s, the animals were leased or loaned rather than offered as gifts. Pandas are now provided in pairs for $1 million a year for terms lasting at least 10 years. Zoos must also pay an additional 6-figure tax for each cub born to pandas in their care. If a panda dies while abroad on loan, its remains must be returned to China. And if a zoo is deemed responsible for the death, it must pay a fine of $500,000. That was what happened when Coco, a panda at the Kobe Zoo in Japan, died of asphyxiation in 2010. Even without such tragedies, zoos must contend with the staggering cost of hosting pandas. In June, animal rights activists delivered thousands of signatures to San Francisco City Hall, protesting a $25 million plan to house pandas at the city's zoo. In 2019, the Copenhagen Zoo drew local backlash for reportedly spending a similar amount on this sprawling enclosure.
Jeg vil gerne sige tillykke til Københavns Zoologiske Have og til alle, der har været involveret i dette store arbejde. Og tillykke til os alle sammen, som nu har fået et par rigtige pandaer, som vi rigtig kan se på i forhåbentlig mange år.
This panda enclosure at Hong Kong's Ocean Park cost $10 million when it opened in 1999. Then there is the cost of keeping the notoriously picky eaters well fed. Some zoos claim to have spent over $500,000 a year on bamboo for just one panda.
So in the park, we feed our pandas 4 times a day. And in between feedings, they'll take a nap for an hour or two. It really depends on the weather and how well they have eaten in the previous meal. So we don't have a fixed feeding schedule for our pandas. We just let them sleep, and then once they wake up, we'll observe and we'll give them a new pile of bamboo leaves.
Eat, sleep, repeat. Giant pandas can be seen as a little lazy, as a little clumsy, but abroad they work around the clock as China's furriest ambassadors. With their big appetites, upkeep can be costly, but for the zoos that house them, they can also mean big business.
Even if dollar for dollar a zoo isn't making back every single dollar that it's investing in the support and the care of the pandas, I think it's still incredibly important from a symbolic standpoint. I think zoos will do whatever they have to maintain themselves as attractions for people, as a place for visitors. And having a panda, that's an instant star attraction as soon as they show up.
In 2008, a magnitude 8.0 earthquake struck China's Sichuan province, killing more than 87,000 people. Since the 1980s, China has been working with the global conservation body WWF to save pandas. The earthquake destroyed much of China's panda habitat, including the main conservation center in the Wolong Nature Reserve. Many pandas had to be given new homes.
因为熊猫可能比以前要变得敏感一些，特别是对一些比较尖锐的声音啊，它们听到之后就反应得很大。就这个时候你要跟它去玩，去减轻它的那种对周围环境的那种敏感。
An Oxford University study published in 2013 found some pandas sent abroad around that time went to countries that had lucrative trade deals with China, or those able to supply it with valuable resources and technology. The panda loans were seen as a way to support local conservation efforts and panda research, as well as fund restorations of quake-damaged facilities. Pandas were sent to the UK in 2011 for the first time in 17 years. The 2013 Oxford study said that deal coincided with a $4 billion contract for Britain to supply China with fish, cars, and renewable energy technology. The study also linked pandas sent to Singapore and Malaysia to the creation of the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area in 2010. Beijing has said the panda loans were to commemorate decades of diplomatic ties with its neighbors. After President Xi Jinping took power in 2012, panda diplomacy flourished. Under Xi, pandas were rented out almost every year, resulting in more than 20 new ambassadors being sent abroad. The Middle East got its first pandas when Qatar hosted the World Cup in 2022. That deal reflected Beijing's ambitions and trade ties in the region.
Both sides has done its utmost to give a comfortable life to giant pandas. You can see that the Qatar government has built up one of the most spacious modern panda enclosure in the world.
But as much as the pandas signal favor, they can also indicate fraught ties. In late 2023, as relations between Washington and Beijing barreled towards historic lows, so did the number of pandas living in the US. Zoos in Washington, Memphis, and San Diego began losing their pandas from 2019. Panda loan extension talks had apparently failed. Rumors swirled that China's panda diplomacy with the US was ending. But that panic eventually blew over. In February, Beijing said the San Diego Zoo would have pandas once again. And soon enough, so would other zoos in the US. By July, the next wave of panda diplomacy in the US was underway.
The presence of pandas at the San Diego Zoo is not going to measurably affect what happens in boardrooms or policy shops in Washington, D.C. But the fact that Xi Jinping stood up and said, we are willing to explore the loan of new pandas to the United States, that was a really important signal to counterparts in the United States to say, things are bad, but they're not so bad that there's no hope for the future.
This panda in Mexico is the only one in the world that doesn't belong to China. Xinxin is the last living descendant of the giant pandas that were given away by Beijing before the mid-1980s. She's also a reminder of how much the world has changed, and panda diplomacy along with it.